The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and dying leaves as I pressed my daughter tighter against my chest. Her tiny fingers clutched the frayed edge of the blanket, the only thing I'd managed to save when they cast me out. 6 months had passed since the rejection ceremony. 6 months since my true mate looked at me with cold shiz and declared me unworthy before the entire pack. 6 months of surviving on the edges of territory that once felt like home. My status as a rejected Omega hung around my neck like a brand of shame, the mark still burning faintly against my skin even now. A permanent reminder that I had been found lacking, that the child I carried, this precious girl, now sleeping in my arms, was deemed insufficient by the man who should have protected us both. "Everything will be all right, little one," I whispered to Lily as she fussed against me. Her silvery white hair, so like mine, caught the last golden rays of the setting sun filtering through the towering pines. "We'll find somewhere to shelter before dark. I promise you that." The forest grew thicker as we moved away from the settled lands, away from the territories where pack politics and hierarchy ruled every breath, every moment. Trees stood like silent sentinels guarding the borders between the known world and whatever lay beyond. I'd heard whispers about the no-man's lands that existed in the deepest parts of the Rocky Mountains, places where lone wolves sometimes built modest existences away from the judgment and the whispers. That was all I wanted now. A quiet place to raise my daughter, a place where the weight of rejection didn't press down on us with every sunrise. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory as I pushed through the dense undergrowth, Lily's weight a comforting presence against my heart. "The greatest strength of an Omega is not in claws or teeth, Mara," she'd told me on her deathbed, her weathered hand pressing something cool and smooth into my palm. "But in her heart, when everything else is taken, this will show you the way home." The moonstone pendant hung at my neck now, its crescent shape embracing a small star cool against my skin. I touched it reflexively, seeking comfort in its familiar weight. Grandmother Esther had given it to me 7 months ago, 3 days before she passed. She'd looked at my swollen belly with such tenderness, such certainty. "When you lose everything," she'd whispered, her eyes already clouding with approaching death, "go north. The Blackwood will recognize what you carry. The debt will be honored." I hadn't understood then. I still wasn't sure I understood now, but I was going north, because there was nowhere else left to go. The memory of that final rejection still played in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't escape. 6 months ago, but it felt like yesterday. Would always feel like yesterday. The Great Hall of the Golden Ridge Pack had been packed with wolves 500 strong, maybe more. Every member of our territory gathered to witness what should have been a moment of joy. The revelation of my pregnancy, the celebration of an heir. Instead, they'd come to watch my world crumble. I'd stood in the center of the ceremonial circle, 6 months pregnant, my hand resting protectively over the swell of my belly. The ultrasound images had been displayed for all to see, clear, undeniable proof of the child growing inside me. A daughter. Alpha King Ironwood had stood before me, his face carved from stone, showing nothing of the man who had whispered promises against my skin in the dark of night, who had claimed me as his mate under the full moon, who had said he would love me forever. "Pack law is clear," he'd announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "No warmth, no recognition of the life we'd created together. An alpha requires a male heir, a son to carry the bloodline forward, to lead when I am gone." I'd felt the ground shifting beneath my feet even then, felt the future I'd imagined dissolving like morning mist. "The child Mara Silverthorne carries is female." He'd said it like a condemnation, like our daughter was a failure before she'd even drawn her first breath. "She cannot fulfill the requirements of an alpha's mate. She cannot give this pack what it needs." "Kale, please," I'd started, but he'd cut me off with a single raised hand. "By the authority granted to me as alpha of the Golden Ridge Pack, witnessed by the elders and the moon herself, I reject Mara Silverthorne as my mate. I sever the bond between us. She is cast out from this territory and stripped of all rights and protections." The words had burned into me like acid. I'd felt the mate bond, already fragile, already damaged by his growing distance over the past weeks, snap completely. The pain had driven me to my knees. A rejection wasn't just emotional. It was physical, spiritual. The wolf inside me had howled in agony as the connection tore away, leaving raw, bleeding edges in its wake. The mark on my neck, a place where he'd bitten me during our mating, had burned with silver fire. The pain so intense I thought I might die from it, might welcome death. But I hadn't died. The pain had faded to a dull, persistent ache, and the mark had remained transformed into something ugly. A scar that proclaimed my shame to anyone with eyes to see it. Through the haze of pain, I'd seen her. Vivian Ashford, standing beside Kale with a proprietary hand on his arm. Her belly just beginning to show the early signs of pregnancy. 3 months along, perhaps. Not enough to be certain of the child's gender, but enough to give Kyle hope. The pack needs security. He'd continued, not even looking at me where I knelt on the cold stone floor. Luna Vivian carries a child. The healers believe it will be male. She will give the Golden Ridge pack what it needs, what Mara cannot provide. The whispers had started then. Some sympathetic, most simply accepting. This was pack law after all. Alphas needed male heirs. It was the way things had always been. Only one voice had cut through the murmurs. Elder Gideon, the pack's historian, ancient and bent with age. He'd been sitting in the back, his milky eyes somehow finding mine across the crowded hall. "The Moonstone," he'd whispered, but in the sudden silence his voice had carried. "I remember the story. The Blackwood owes a debt to the Silverthorn bloodline." Kale had shot him a sharp look. "Enough, old man. The decision is made." But Gideon had held my gaze for a moment longer, and I'd seen something there. Recognition, knowledge, a message I couldn't quite decipher. Then pack warriors had hauled me to my feet. They'd given me 24 hours to leave the territory. 24 hours to gather what little I could carry and disappear from the only home I'd ever known. I'd walked out of that hall with my head high, refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Refused to let my daughter's first introduction to the world be the sound of her mother sobbing. But once I was alone in the small cabin that had been mine, the tears had come, and they'd continued long into the night. A sharp cry from Lily brought me back to the present. She was hungry again, always hungry. I was doing my best to feed her, but 6 months of barely adequate nutrition had taken its toll on my milk supply. She needed more than I could give her. We both did. I found a fallen log and sank down onto it, arranging my worn cloak to provide some privacy as I shifted Lily to nurse. The familiar tug and pull brought a measure of peace. This at least I could still do. This one thing I could still provide. The autumn light was fading fast now. In another hour, maybe less full darkness would fall, and the temperature with it. We needed shelter. Real shelter, not just a hollow beneath a tree or a cave barely large enough to crouch in. The past 6 months had been a crash course in survival. I'd given birth to Lily alone in a cave during a summer thunderstorm, biting down on a strip of leather to keep from screaming. I delivered my own child with trembling hands, cut the cord with my grandmother's knife, and wrapped her in the blanket I'd carried from the pack. I'd used every scrap of knowledge my grandmother had taught me about herbs and healing. Yarrow to stop the bleeding, comfrey to help me heal. Shepherd's purse when the cramping threatened to overwhelm me. I'd kept us both alive through sheer stubbornness and the desperate need to prove that we mattered. That Lily mattered. That being a daughter didn't make her worthless. During the long days and longer nights, I'd taught myself other skills. I'd drawn maps of the territories we passed through, marking water sources and game trails. I'd learned to read the weather and the shape of the clouds and the behavior of the birds. I'd tracked patterns, made notes, prepared for a future I could barely imagine. My grandmother had been the history keeper of the Golden Ridge Pack, the one who remembered the old stories, the ancient laws, the connections between bloodlines that others had forgotten. She taught me to value knowledge, to understand that power came in many forms. I'd never imagined I'd need those lessons to survive. Lily finished nursing and let out a small, satisfied sound. I held her against my shoulder, patting her back gently until she burped. Such a tiny thing, so perfect. 4 months old and already showing signs of the strong wolf she would become. If I could keep her alive long enough to grow into that strength. "North," I murmured to her, adjusting the blanket around her small body. "Grandmother said to go north, to find the Blackwood. I don't know what that means, little love, but it's all we have." The wind picked up, carrying a new scent, something I didn't recognize. Territory markers, but not from any pack I knew. The smell was crisp and cold, like snow on high peaks. Powerful, ancient. I should turn back, find another route. Trespassing on marked territory was dangerous at the best of times. For a rejected Omega carrying an infant, it could be fatal. But the wind also carried something else, the promise of a storm. I could feel it in the changing pressure, see it in the darkening clouds rolling in from the west. A big one. Maybe the first blizzard of the season, come early to catch the unprepared. We wouldn't survive it in the open. I stood cradling Lily close and kept walking north, into the unknown territory, toward whatever waited in the gathering darkness. The pendant against my chest grew warmer with each step, as if responding to my decision. "Please," I whispered to the wind, to the trees, to whatever gods might listen to a rejected Omega's prayer. Please let us find shelter. Please let us survive one more night. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. And then I heard it, faint but unmistakable. The sound of a child crying. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to keep moving, to protect my own daughter first and always. I couldn't afford to get involved in pack business, couldn't risk drawing attention to myself. But the Omega in me, the part that had been born to nurture, to heal, to protect the young, wouldn't let me walk away. I changed direction, following the sound deeper into the marked territory. The crying grew louder, more desperate. A wolf pup, I thought, young, frightened. I found him in a hollow beneath a massive fallen oak. He was in wolf form, a small dark shape with distinctive silver markings on his muzzle. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old in human years. Old enough to shift, but too young to survive alone in the wilderness, especially not with a blizzard coming. It's all right, I said softly, setting Lily down carefully on a dry patch of moss and approaching the pup with slow, careful movements. I won't hurt you, I promise. The pup growled, a sound so disproportionately fierce for his tiny size that under other circumstances I might have smiled. His eyes were wide with fear, but there was courage there too. He was terrified, but he wasn't backing down. Brave little one, aren't you? I kept my voice gentle, non-threatening. The way my grandmother had taught me to speak to frightened animals. You're lost, separated from your pack, but you're going to be all right. I reached into my pack and pulled out a strip of dried meat, the last of my meager supplies, but worth it if it helped build trust. I tossed it toward the pup, careful not to get too close. He sniffed it suspiciously, then snatched it up in his small jaws. While he was distracted, I moved a bit closer. I have a daughter, I told him, gesturing toward Lily. See, she's just a baby. She won't hurt you either. We're just passing through, just trying to stay warm and dry. Like you. The pup looked at Lily with obvious curiosity. His growling stopped. After a long moment, he began to shift. The shimmer of transformation was always beautiful to watch. Magic made visible the ancient gift of our kind on full display. When it faded, a small boy stood before me, dark hair plastered to his head with rain, tear tracks on his cheeks, wearing nothing but the tattered remains of clothes that hadn't survived the shift. My papa will find me, he declared with all the conviction a child could muster, though his trembling lip betrayed his uncertainty. He's the strongest wolf in the whole world. Nothing can beat him. I'm sure he is, I agreed immediately, removing my wet cloak and draping it over his small shoulders. He was shivering violently, lips tinged blue with cold. And I'm sure he's searching for you right now. But until he finds you, we need to get you warm and dry. It's not good for pups to be cold and wet. He looked at Lily with open curiosity, momentarily distracted from his fear. Is she a wolf too? Yes, I answered, that familiar pain rising in my chest. The pain of knowing that my daughter would never know the pack bonds she should have inherited. That her mother's rejection had robbed her of her birthright before she was even born. But she's too young to shift yet, too young to know what she is. I'm Rowan, the boy announced, moving closer to examine Lily with the intense focus only children possessed. What's her name? Lily, I said. And I'm Mara. Thunder rumbled overhead, close enough to make Rowan flinch. He instinctively moved closer to me, seeking the comfort of an adult presence. I put an arm around his small shoulders, feeling how cold and fragile he was beneath the cloak. We need better shelter. I murmured, more to myself than to him. The hollow beneath the oak offered some protection from the wind, but not nearly enough. Night was falling rapidly now, and with it the temperature. A wet, cold night in these mountains could be deadly for young ones. There's a cabin, Rowan said, suddenly pointing deeper into the forest. Papa showed me. It's not far. We go there sometimes, just us. It's our special place. Every instinct warned me against going deeper into this territory. Every shred of common sense screamed that I was making a terrible mistake. But looking at Rowan's blue-tinged lips and feeling the first drops of freezing rain begin to fall, I knew I didn't have a choice. Can you lead us there? I asked him. Rowan nodded seriously, slipping his small hand into mine with surprising trust. A child's faith that adults would keep them safe, that the world wasn't as cruel as it sometimes seemed. I gathered Lily back into my arms, grateful that she'd fallen asleep despite the cold and the tension. One less thing to worry about. Stay close to me, I told Rowan. Don't let go of my hand. He gripped my fingers tighter. I won't, I promise. Together we set out through the darkening forest, led by a child into the heart of territory I had no right to enter. Toward a cabin that belonged to an unknown alpha who would almost certainly not welcome our presence. But the storm was coming, and the alternative was death. So I walked forward praying that my grandmother's moonstone would bring us the protection she'd promised, that the debt she'd spoken of would somehow keep us safe, that we would live to see another dawn. The cabin appeared through the curtain of rain like something from a half-forgotten dream. Small but solid, its log walls partially hidden behind hanging branches and thick moss. Not abandoned, I realized immediately. Maintained. The wood was oiled against rot. The roof looked recently repaired. Papa takes care of it, Rowan explained, pushing open the unlocked door. He says it's important to have a place that's just ours, where we can be quiet together. Inside was blessedly dry, rough wooden boards instead of dirt floor. And even more surprising signs that someone used this place regularly. A stack of dry firewood against one wall, a crude shelf carved into the logs, a small potbelly stove in the corner. Rowan, I said carefully, suddenly very aware that we were intruding on someone's private refuge. Someone powerful enough to hold this territory. Whose cabin is this? I don't want to trespass. It's okay, he assured me with the absolute confidence of childhood. Papa won't mind. He says we should always help those who need it. That's what makes us different from the bad wolves. His words didn't entirely calm my nerves, but the storm outside had reached full fury. Rain hammered against the walls. Wind howled through the trees like a living thing. I had no choice. Moving quickly, I set about making the space livable. The fire took easily. Someone had left kindling and tinder ready. Within minutes, blessed warmth began to spread through the small cabin. I settled Lily on my lap, using the edge of her blanket to dry Rowan's dark hair. Your papa sounds like a wise man, I said, trying to keep my voice light and conversational, while my mind raced with worry. What would happen when the owner of this cabin returned? Would he understand that we meant no harm? Or would he see only a trespassing Omega and react with violence? He's the wisest and strongest, Rowan declared proudly, leaning into my gentle touch. Everyone has to do what he says. The whole pack, because he's the alpha. My blood went cold. Not just any wolf, an alpha. And from Rowan's innocent pride, a powerful one. And what does your mama think about that? I asked, trying to sound casual. Rowan's face fell instantly, and I regretted the question immediately. I don't have a mama. She died when I was born. Papa says she watches me from the moon now, that she's always with me even if I can't see her. Oh, sweetheart. The words escaped before I could stop them. I pulled him closer, this child who'd never known a mother's love. I'm so sorry. Without thinking, I reached out and brushed the damp hair from his forehead, a gesture my own mother had used to comfort me before she passed, before my grandmother became my only family. Rowan leaned into the touch like a plant seeking sunlight, and suddenly he was crying. Not the frightened tears of a lost child, but deep body-shaking sobs. The kind that came from a well of grief too big for a small body to contain. I pulled him onto my lap beside Lily, rocking them both as the storm raged outside. It's okay to cry, I murmured, swaying gently. Even the bravest wolves cry sometimes. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you real. Eventually his sobs subsided. He pulled back, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. Papa doesn't cry, he said with absolute certainty. Maybe not where you can see, I answered carefully, my heart aching for this small boy and the father who clearly loved him, but couldn't quite fill the void left by loss. But I think he has sad moments too. Everyone does. Rowan seemed to consider this revolutionary idea, his young face serious in the firelight. As I worked to make our temporary shelter more comfortable, I explored the cabin's small resources. On the shelf, I found a bundle of dried herbs hanging, medicinal plants, chamomile, mint, valerian root. Someone who knew healing had prepared these. Using a small pot I found stored with the firewood, I melted snow from outside and brewed a simple tea. Not strong, just enough to warm us from the inside and help Rowan relax. This will help you feel better, I explained, letting it cool before offering some to Rowan. It was barely more than warm water with a hint of chamomile, but I'd added a touch of honey I found in a sealed jar. Rowan drank it gratefully, his small face lighting up at the sweetness. I even managed to give a tiny amount to Lily, just a few drops on my finger, that she sucked eagerly. The honey would give her a bit of energy, help her through the night. As we sat in the firelight, Rowan gradually relaxed. The warmth, the food, the simple comfort of not being alone, it all worked to ease his fear. Tell me about your pack, I said gently, partly to distract him, partly because I needed to know what I was dealing with, where exactly I'd ended up. And Rowan, with the open honesty of childhood, told me everything. About the Northern Rockies pack, about territories that stretched farther than a wolf could run in a full day, about the massive stone fortress that served as the pack's gathering center built into the mountainside itself. He spoke of his father with unwavering admiration, of pack members who clearly loved their young prince, of a life that seemed stable and strong in ways the Golden Ridge pack had never been. I listened, learning more about these northern territories than any outsider probably should. But Rowan needed to talk, needed to remember that he had a home, a family, people searching for him, and I needed to prepare myself for what would come when his father arrived. "Where were you today?" I asked gently after a while. "When you got separated," Rowan's expression became guilty. "Papa was busy with the council. I was supposed to stay with Anton. He's my guard. But I wanted to explore the forest, so I snuck away." His lower lip trembled again. "Papa will be so angry." "I think he'll be more relieved than angry," I assured him, though I wasn't certain that was true. Alphas ruled their packs with strict discipline. A child who disobeyed orders, even a beloved son, might face harsh consequences. When someone you love is in danger, being angry comes after being grateful they're safe. Rowan yawned hugely, his small body finally giving in to exhaustion. The fear of the cold, the crying, it had all taken its toll. "Why don't we rest while we wait?" I suggested, spreading my cloak on the floor near the stove to create an improvised bed. "Your papa might not be able to pick up the trail until the rain stops. We should save our energy." Finally, he nodded, crawling onto the makeshift bed. I laid Lily beside him, and Rowan instinctively curved his small body around hers, a protective gesture that made my throat tight with emotion. "I'll keep her safe," he murmured sleepily, "just like Papa keeps me safe." "I know you will, brave one." I stayed awake, feeding wood to the fire and listening to the storm. The pendant rested against my skin, its presence a constant reminder of my grandmother's faith in me. "When everything is taken, this will show you the way home." Was this home, this cabin in unknown territory, this chance meeting with a lost child? Or was it just another stop on an endless journey I didn't know? But for now, we were warm, we were safe, and that was more than we'd had in 6 long months. As I stared into the flames, a new scent cut through the cabin's smoky air. Powerful, primal, unmistakably alpha. I jerked my head up just as a massive shadow fell across the doorway. The northern alpha stood there, backlit by the storm. Rain streamed from his broad shoulders. His eyes caught the firelight and reflected it back like burning coins of gold. The sheer power emanating from him hit me like a physical blow, pinning me in place as effectively as if he'd wrapped his hands around my throat. Our gazes met across the fire, and in that instant, I knew my fate had changed forever. Time seemed to stop. The storm faded to background noise. Everything narrowed to this moment, this man, this alpha whose territory I'd invaded, whose son I'd sheltered, whose private refuge I'd entered without permission. He was huge, easily 6'4", maybe more, broad-shouldered and powerfully built in a way that spoke of both natural strength and hard-won muscle. Dark hair with striking silver at the temples, a face that could have been carved from granite, all hard planes and sharp angles. But his eyes held something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not the instant violence I'd braced for, but something more complex, more dangerous in its subtlety. Slowly, carefully, I rose to my feet, positioning myself between him and the sleeping children. A futile gesture if he wanted to harm us. My fragile Omega body would offer no real resistance to an alpha of his obvious power. But I would try. I would die trying if I had to. "Please," I whispered, the word barely audible over the crackle of fire and howl of wind. The boy was lost. I only wanted to keep him safe until morning. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak, just studied me with those burning amber depths, taking in my worn clothes, my too thin frame, the rejection mark on my neck that I couldn't hide. Then his gaze moved to Lily sleeping beside his son, to her silvery hair, her tiny perfect features. "You found my son," he said finally. His voice was deep, controlled, revealing nothing of his thoughts, but not immediately hostile. "That was something," I nodded, not trusting my voice. The alpha stepped fully into the cabin. Water dripped from his dark clothing onto the wooden floor. In the firelight, I could see him more clearly. The resemblance to Rowan was unmistakable. The same dark hair, though the alpha's, was touched with that distinctive silver. The same strong features. The same intelligence in his eyes. He moved toward the children, and I forced myself not to flinch. Forced myself to trust that he wouldn't harm his own son, and that perhaps my presence here wouldn't doom Lily. He knelt beside Rowan with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his imposing size. One large hand hovered over the boy's head for a moment before gently smoothing his dark hair. The gesture was achingly tender. He was frightened, I managed to say, finding my voice. Cold and wet from the storm, I couldn't leave him. No, the Alpha said quietly, not looking away from his sleeping son. You couldn't. His gaze moved to Lily then, and I saw him taking in the details. Her age, her features, the silvery white hair so unlike Rowan's darkness. Your child, he asked. Yes. I fought to keep my voice steady. My daughter, Lily. He studied me then with an intensity that made me feel transparent. I knew what he saw. The rejection marks stood out clearly on my throat, impossible to miss. My clothing was worn and patched. My pack had the look of someone who'd been traveling rough for months. And beneath it all, the faint scent of another pack's territory, Golden Ridge, though it had faded over time. You're far from home, Omega, he observed. Not an accusation, just a statement of fact. I have no home, I answered. The truth escaped before I could think better of it. Not anymore. Something dangerous flashed in those fierce eyes. Something that looked almost like anger, though not directed at me. Rejected, he said, not a question. My fingers traced the scar on my throat unconsciously. Yes, the child's father wanted nothing to do with either of us. He found a more suitable match, one who could give him sons. The Alpha's jaw clenched, just for a moment, almost imperceptibly, but I saw it. So you wander hostile territory with an infant, on the eve of winter. When he put it that way, my desperation sounded like madness. Perhaps it was. I was seeking the no man's lands, I explained quietly. I didn't mean to trespass on your domain. I must have gone too far north. When the storm came and I heard Rowan crying, I trailed off. What more was there to say? He watched me in silence for a long moment. The only sound was the children's quiet breathing and the storm raging outside. Finally, he spoke. The storm will last until tomorrow. The temperature will drop to well below zero. You and your child will not survive another night in this wilderness. Fear spiked through me. Was he ordering me to leave? In the middle of the blizzard, you will come to the manor, he continued, and there was no room for argument in his tone. Not a request, a command. This is not a negotiation. I wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed at me to maintain what little independence I had left. To not put myself and Lily under the power of yet another Alpha who might decide we were expendable. But looking at the frost already forming on the inside of the cabin's single window, feeling the temperature plummeting, even with the fire burning, I knew he was right. We wouldn't survive. Not out here. Not in this storm. If I come, I said quietly, I need your word, your promise that no harm will come to my daughter. The Alpha stood rising to his full imposing height. For a moment, I thought he might be angry at the audacity of a rejected Omega demanding promises from a supreme Alpha. Instead, he held my gaze and spoke with absolute authority. I give you my protection. No harm will come to you or your daughter while you are under my roof. This I swear on my honor in the name of Blackwood. A formal declaration, the kind that bound an Alpha's word with the weight of pack law and ancient tradition, not something given lightly, not something that could be easily broken. The crescent pendant grew warm where it rested against my chest, as if confirming the oath, as if recognizing something I didn't yet understand. Thank you, I whispered. We accept your protection until the storm passes. He nodded once. Then with unexpected gentleness, he lifted Rowan into his arms. The boy stirred but didn't wake instinctively, nestling against his father's broad chest. The trust between them was absolute and beautiful. I gathered Lily, wrapping her securely in her blanket. She blinked awake for just a moment, her tiny hand reaching up to touch my face before she drifted back to sleep, completely trusting, completely dependent on me to keep her safe. I prayed I wasn't about to betray that trust by walking into the unknown. Stay close, the Alpha instructed as we stepped into the storm. The path is not visible in this weather. I clutched Lily tight and followed him into the darkness. Rain instantly soaked through my thin clothing. Wind cut like knives. I hunched over Lily, using my body to shield her from the worst of it. The Alpha moved confidently through the forest, navigating by some internal sense, even as the storm erased any visible trail. I struggled to keep up, my legs weak from months of poor nutrition, my arms aching from Lily's weight. But I didn't fall behind, couldn't afford to. The thought of losing sight of him in this darkness, of being separated in hostile territory with my daughter, gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, lights appeared through the trees. Warm golden points against the black night. As we drew closer, a massive structure emerged from the storm. A fortress. That was the only word for it. Built of stone and timber, it seemed to grow organically from the mountainside. High walls surrounded it, protection against both weather and enemies. Towers rose at intervals, their windows glowing with firelight. It was magnificent, imposing. A statement of power and permanence that took my breath away. Guards materialized from the shadows as we approached wolves in human form, wearing heavy cloaks against the weather. Their surprise was evident, even through the downpour when they saw their alpha in the unexpected company he'd brought. My Alpha 1 began but fell silent at a sharp look from the man carrying Rowan. "Prepare rooms in the east wing," the Alpha commanded without breaking stride. "Find dry clothes suitable for a woman and infant. Food, milk for the child." His gaze flicked to Lily in my arms. "Inform Elena that her services will be needed. Send word to Beta Olga." The guards scattered to obey and another stepped forward to escort us inside. I followed on numb feet, too cold and too overwhelmed to fully process what was happening. We passed through tall wooden doors into a great hall. Massive hearths blazed with fire, casting dancing shadows on stone floors and wooden beams. The warmth hit me like a wall, so intense after the cold that I actually staggered. Pack members paused in their activities to stare as we passed. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. An outsider, a stranger, a rejected Omega bearing another pack's scent, and a child who clearly wasn't the Alpha's. I kept my eyes lowered, falling back on Omega instincts. Don't challenge, don't draw attention. Make yourself small and unthreatening. I pressed Lily closer as we climbed a broad staircase and moved deeper into the fortress. The whispers followed us like a living thing. Who is she? Where did the Alpha find her? Is that her child? Look at her neck. She's been rejected. What is she doing here? A woman's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp with worry and authority. Thorne, I looked up to see an elegant woman approaching, her graying hair perfectly arranged despite the late hour. Beta, I realized from the power she carried. High-ranking given her familiar tone with the Alpha. "We sent search parties at sunset," she said, her eyes on Rowan sleeping peacefully in his father's arms. "Where did you find him?" "He's safe, Olga," the Alpha Thorne replied. "This Omega found him and sheltered him from the storm." The woman's shrewd eyes assessed me carefully, taking in my pitiful appearance, the child in my arms, the rejection mark I couldn't hide. To her credit, her expression betrayed none of her thoughts. "I'll take the boy," she offered, reaching for Rowan. "No." Thorne's refusal was quiet but absolute. "He stays with me tonight." A flash of surprise crossed her features before she composed herself with practiced grace. "Of course. This way, please." She led us through corridors lit by oil lamps and firelight. I was acutely aware of the wet trail I left on polished floors. Of the pack members we passed, all stopping to stare at the bedraggled outsider being escorted through their home. Lily fussed in my arms, whimpering at the unfamiliar surroundings and the tension she could sense in my body. "Hush, little one," I murmured, trying to soothe her. "We're safe now. We're safe." Natty, was that true? Or had I just walked us into a different kind of danger? The woman Olga led us to a heavy wooden door that she pushed open with one hand. The room beyond stole what little breath I had left. It was enormous. A bed large enough for 3 people dominated one wall, covered in thick furs and woven blankets. A fire already blazed in the hearth, and steam rose from a large copper tub placed before it. Fresh clothing lay folded on the bed, soft fabrics and muted colors. And in the corner, someone had already placed a small cradle. "These are the Alpha's personal guest quarters." Olga explained, her tone neutral, but her gaze sharp as a blade. "No one has used them in some time." The significance wasn't lost on me. This wasn't a random guest room or servants' quarters. This was the East Wing, the Alpha's private domain. Placement here was a statement, a message to anyone who might question my presence. "Thank you," I said, not knowing how else to respond to such unexpected care. "Elena will be with you shortly," Olga continued. "She's our healer and midwife. She'll examine both you and the child, make sure you're well." She paused in the doorway, studying me with eyes that missed nothing. "I am Olga Stormwind, first beta of the Northern Rockies pack." "Mara," I introduced myself, in return, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mara Silverthorne, and this is Lily." Something flickered in Olga's stern features as she looked at my daughter. Something almost like softness. "How old?" "4 months." The answer came automatically. Olga nodded as if confirming something to herself. Then her gaze returned to mine and the hardness was back. "The Alpha has given you his protection. That means something here. But understand this, we will be watching. For his safety and for Rowan's." I would expect nothing less, I answered honestly. With that, she withdrew, leaving me alone in quarters more luxurious than any I'd ever occupied. Even before my rejection, even when I'd been the mate of an alpha. I stood for a moment, simply trying to process everything that had happened. This morning, Lily and I had been alone in the wilderness, struggling to survive. Now we stood in a Supreme Alpha's fortress, under his personal protection, in rooms reserved for honored guests. It felt like a dream. Or perhaps a trap I was too desperate to recognize. Lily's crying grew more insistent, pulling me from my thoughts. She needed to be changed, fed, kept warm. Whatever else was happening, whatever political currents I'd stumbled into, my daughter's needs came first. I moved to the bed and carefully laid her down on unwrapping the damp blanket. Her little face was red from crying, her tiny fists waving in distress. But she was warm. She was safe. For now, that had to be enough. The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. True to Thorne's word, Lily and I remained housed in the East Wing, close enough to Rowan's chambers that the boy could visit daily, which he did with an enthusiasm that was as touching as it was unexpected, given the brevity of our first meeting. The child had formed an attachment to us both that seemed to defy explanation. He would appear at our door each morning sometimes, before I'd even finished dressing, his face bright with excitement. "Can Lily play today?" He'd ask, though at 4 months old, Lily's idea of play consisted mostly of grabbing at his hair and making delighted gurgling sounds. "Can you tell me another story?" And I would. Because how could I refuse this motherless boy who looked at me with such hope, who seemed to bloom under the smallest gestures of maternal affection? Elena Ravencroft, the Pack's healer, had become my closest ally in those early days. She was a woman of perhaps 50 winters, with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes that held both wisdom and warmth. She'd examined Lily and me that first night with gentle, capable hands. "Malnourished," she'd pronounced, though not unkindly. "Both of you. But nothing rest and proper food won't fix. You've done well to keep her healthy on your own. The herbs you used after birth, Yarrow Comfrey's shepherd's purse, that was skilled work." "My grandmother taught me," I'd answered, feeling a pang of loss. "She was the history keeper and healer for our pack." Elena had nodded thoughtfully. "She taught you well. We could use someone with your knowledge in the medical wing if you're interested, once you've recovered your strength." That offer had surprised me, but I'd accepted gratefully, desperate for purpose beyond simply existing as the Alpha's charity case. Now, 3 weeks after that storm-swept night, I found myself working alongside Elena most days, sorting dried herbs for winter medicines, learning the specific ailments common to wolves in this northern climate, discovering that my grandmother's teachings translated well to this new territory. The work gave me value beyond my Omega status, beyond my rejection. It reminded me that I had skills, knowledge, worth, and it kept my mind occupied so I didn't spend every waking moment thinking about Alpha Thorne Blackwood. That was becoming increasingly difficult. I was in the medical wing bundling lavender for storage when Elena spoke without looking up from the tincture she was preparing. "He's never bonded with anyone so quickly," she said. "Not since his mother died." I didn't need to ask who she meant. "Rowan is special, brave and kind." "He is." Elena measured drops of valerian into a dark glass bottle with practiced precision. But I wasn't talking only about the boy. My hands stilled on the lavender stems. "What do you mean, Thorne?" She said his name simply, as if discussing the weather. "I've known him since he was younger than Rowan. Watched him grow, watched him become Alpha, watched him marry Catherine, and then lose her." A pause. "He built walls after that, high ones. Kept everyone at arm's length except his son. I kept my eyes on my work, afraid of what my face might reveal. Grief does that to people." "It does." Elena moved to the next bottle. "But something shifted when you arrived. I see him watching you when you work with Rowan. When you tell your stories in the evening, yes, I've heard about those. Half the pack has started attending." A smile touched her lips. "He watches you with something I haven't seen in 5 years. Interest. Awareness." Heat crept up my neck. "I'm sure you're mistaken. I'm just a rejected Omega, a temporary guest until—" "Until what?" Elena interrupted gently. "Until the spring thaw, until Lily is older. You've been here 3 weeks, Mara. Thorne hasn't mentioned you leaving. In fact, he's done quite the opposite." Before I could ask what she meant, the door to the medical wing opened. Thorne himself stood there, filling the doorway with his considerable presence. Even after 3 weeks, the sight of him still made my breath catch. He was dressed simply today, dark leather pants and a linen shirt, the sleeves rolled to his elbows. But there was nothing simple about the power he radiated, the unconscious authority in every movement. Pardon the interruption, he said, his deep voice sending warmth through my chest. Elena, the scouts need more of that salve for frostbite. The temperatures are dropping faster than expected. I'll prepare a fresh batch. Elena moved toward her stores. Mara can help. She has skilled hands with medicines. Thorne's gaze found mine, held. So I've heard. The pack speaks well of your work here. Pride bloomed unexpectedly in my chest. When had I last been praised for my skills, rather than judged for my failures? I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute, I managed to say, to repay your kindness in sheltering us. Something flickered in his expression. It's not kindness. You saved my son. Any decent person would have done the same. But you did it. He stepped further into the room, and I was suddenly very aware of Elena's presence as a witness, a rejected Omega alone with an infant in hostile territory during a storm. You could have hidden, saved your strength for your own child, but you didn't. I didn't know what to say to that. The praise felt too large, too significant. I was just trying to survive, trying to be the kind of person my grandmother had taught me to be. How is Rowan? I asked, changing the subject. His cough seemed better this morning. Improved thanks to your tea. Thorne's lips quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. He insists only you make it correctly, says it tastes different when anyone else tries. It's the honey, I explained. You have to add it at just the right temperature or it loses effectiveness. And singing while it steeps doesn't hurt. Singing. Now there was definitely amusement in his voice. Of course. Elena made a small sound that might have been a laugh, poorly disguised as a cough. I'll get that salve prepared. Mara, why don't you show the Alpha the new herb garden layout we discussed? Get his approval for the spring planting. It was a transparent excuse to leave us alone, but Thorne simply nodded and I found myself following him from the medical wing, acutely aware of the curious stares from pack members as we walked through the corridors together. We ended up in the courtyard where the winter garden lay dormant beneath a light layer of snow. But I could see the bones of it, the careful planning, the efficient layout. My mother created this, Thorne said, surprising me with the personal information. She believed that even in the deepest winter life should be remembered, that we needed green-growing things to remind us spring would come again. There was old pain in his voice, loss layered upon loss. She sounds wise, I said softly, and the garden is beautiful. Even sleeping, you can see the care that went into it. We stood in silence for a moment, watching snow drift down in lazy spirals. Then Thorne spoke again, his voice lower, more intimate. Your grandmother's pendant, the moonstone. Do you know its significance? I brushed my fingers over the crescent through my shirt. She said it was protection, that it would guide me home when all else was lost. It's more than that. Thorne turned to face me fully. That symbol, the silver crescent embracing the star, marks you as under Northern Rockies' protection. A promise made generations ago when your grandmother saved my grandfather's life during a border war. Shock rippled through me. I didn't know. She never told me about. Alpha William Blackwood was ambushed 40 years ago, Thorne continued. Outnumbered, wounded, left for dead in no man's land. Your grandmother, Esther Silverthorne, was traveling between territories. She found him, used her healing skills to save his life when any other healer would have said it was hopeless. His intense stare held mine like physical touch. In gratitude, my grandfather gave her that pendant, the family crest of the Blackwood line, and he made an oath witnessed by the moon herself. Any who carried Esther's blood and wore that symbol would be granted protection by the Northern Rockies pack, forever. The silver crescent seemed to pulse with gentle heat against my skin, as if confirming the truth of his words. She never claimed the debt, I whispered. Never asked for anything. No, she was content to let the oath stand unused, until it was needed. Thorne stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body in the cold air. Until you needed it. I didn't know, I repeated, feeling the weight of my grandmother's gift settling over me. When she told me to go north to find the Blackwood, I thought she was delirious. I didn't understand. She knew. His voice was certain. She knew that if you ever lost everything, you had a place to go. People bound by honor to protect you. Why are you telling me this now? Thorne was quiet for a long moment. Snow collected in his dark hair, melting on contact with his skin. Because I don't want you to feel like a charity case, like you're here on sufferance. You have a right to be here, Mara, by ancient oath and blood debt. This isn't temporary refuge. It's home if you choose it. My throat tightened with emotion. I don't know what to say. Say you'll stay. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was enormous. Not as a guest, as pack. Give Lily the birthright that was stolen from her. Give yourself the home you deserve. I looked up at him, this powerful alpha who had shown me more kindness in 3 weeks than my own mate had in years, who looked at my daughter with respect rather than disappointment, who let his son attach himself to us without fear or resentment. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Is it really just about the debt, the oath? His jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might not answer. Then, at first, yes, obligation, honor. The duty to uphold my grandfather's promise. He paused and something shifted in his expression, something vulnerable beneath the alpha's mask. But now, I prompted when he didn't continue. Now I see Rowan smile, truly smile for the first time since his mother died. I hear him laugh when you tell your stories. Watch him seek comfort from you when he's hurt or frightened. His voice dropped lower. I see you in the medical wing using knowledge and skill to help my pack. I hear the elders speak of you with respect. The Omegas come to you for advice. He stepped closer still, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Now I want you to stay because my pack needs you, because Rowan needs you. A pause waited with significance. Because I want you here. My heart hammered against my ribs. The intensity in those amber depths was almost too much to bear. This wasn't the distant, controlled alpha I'd first met. This was a man letting me see past his defenses, letting me see want. I have a daughter, I said, though I wasn't sure why. He obviously knew this. I know. From another alpha, a man who rejected us both. I know that too. I'm Omega, rejected, marked as unworthy by my own mate. His hand came up, fingers ghosting along my jaw with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so powerful. And I see a woman who survived 6 months alone in the wilderness with an infant, who risked her own safety to save a child who wasn't hers, who has more strength in her smallest finger than most alphas have in their entire body. The touch sent electricity racing across my skin, made it hard to think, hard to remember all the reasons this was dangerous. That mark on your neck doesn't define you, Mara, he said softly. Your actions do, your choices do, and you've shown me exactly who you are. Someone brave, skilled, compassionate. His thumb brushed my cheekbone. Someone worthy. Tears pricked at my eyes. When had anyone last called me worthy? When had I last felt like anything but a failure? I'm frightened, I admitted in a whisper. Of me. Of hoping, of believing this could be real, of letting myself trust again, only to have it destroyed. Understanding flickered across his features. I can't promise I won't hurt you. I'm not perfect. I carry my own damage, my own walls. Honesty that stole my breath. But I can promise that I see you, not as charity, not as obligation, as someone I want in my life, in Rowan's life, in this pack. As what I needed to hear him say it, needed to understand what he was offering. As pack member, as valued advisor. His hand cupped my face fully now, warm and solid. As someone I'm beginning to care for far more than is probably wise, given how recently we met. Thorne, I'm not asking for promises, he interrupted gently. I'm not demanding anything. I'm simply asking you to stay. To give this, whatever this is between us, a chance to grow. No pressure, no expectations beyond honest effort. It was more than I dared hope for, more than I deserved after being discarded like trash by my previous mate. But looking into Thorne's eyes, I saw sincerity. Saw a man who'd also known loss and was brave enough to risk caring again. I want to stay. I said the words emerging stronger than I'd expected. I want Lily to have a home, a pack. I swallowed hard. I want to see where this leads. The smile that crossed his face transformed him, made him look younger, less burdened. Then stay, he said simply. Stay and let's discover it together. The decision to stay officially was announced at the next pack gathering. Thorne stood before 300 wolves and declared that Mara Silverthorne and Lily Silverthorne were now full members of the Northern Rockies pack, entitled to all rights and protections thereof. The response was mixed. Some wolves cheered, already won over by my work in the medical wing or my stories in the evening. Others remained silent, uncertain about accepting a rejected Omega into their ranks. But no one challenged Thorne's authority. Not when he stood there, radiating alpha power and absolute certainty. Afterward, as pack members approached to offer formal welcomes, Rowan appeared at my side. He slipped his small hand into mine and looked up with shining eyes. Does this mean you're really staying forever? I knelt down to his level, ignoring the formal greetings happening around us. This was more important. Yes, sweet one. Lily and I are staying. This is home now. He threw his arms around my neck with the wholehearted enthusiasm only children possessed. I'm so happy. Now you can be my mama for real. The words hit me like a physical blow. Mama. This child, who'd never known his mother, wanted me to fill that role. Trusted me enough to give me that title. I held him tight, blinking back tears. I would be honored, Rowan. So very honored. When I looked up, Thorne was watching us. The emotion in his gaze was complex grief for what his son had lost, gratitude for what we might build together, and something deeper. Something that made my pulse race. The future suddenly seemed less terrifying, less impossible. We had time. We had safety. We had the beginning of something precious. That would have to be enough. But peace, I was learning, was a fragile thing. 4 weeks after my arrival, a messenger arrived from the Golden Ridge Pack. The announcement sent a ripple of tension through the manor. I was in the medical wing when Olga came to find me, her expression grim. The Alpha requests your presence in the council chamber, she said. There's been communication from your former pack. My stomach dropped. I'd known this moment would come eventually. Kale couldn't simply let me disappear without consequence. But I'd hoped for more time, more distance. I followed Olga through the corridors, trying to quiet the panic rising in my chest. Lily was safe with Elena. Rowan was at his lessons. Whatever happened, they were protected. The council chamber was a large room dominated by a massive wooden table. Thorne sat at its head, several of his top advisors around him. His face was impassive, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He gestured to the empty chair beside him. Not across the table with the others, but at his right hand, a position of honor and trust. I sat grateful for the solid chair beneath me, for his presence beside me. A messenger arrived this morning, Thorne began without preamble, from Alpha Kale Ironwood of the Golden Ridge Pack. He slid a sealed letter across the table toward me. He requests that you be returned to his territory, along with the child. The words hit like ice water. Returned, he rejected me. He has no claim. He cites an old pack law. Olga interrupted, her voice crisp. One that states pups born of an alpha seed belong to the father's pack regardless of the mother's status. That law hasn't been enforced in decades, another advisor protested. It's archaic, but still technically valid, Olga finished grimly, which gives him legal standing to make the request. I looked at the letter at Kael's seal pressed into the wax. Couldn't bring myself to break it open. Couldn't bear to read whatever justifications he'd written for wanting back what he'd thrown away. Why now? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He made it clear he wanted nothing to do with us. Vivian was pregnant with his heir. Why would he suddenly care where we are? Thorne and Olga exchanged a look, some communication passing between them that I couldn't interpret. We've heard rumors, Thorne said carefully, about complications with Luna Viviana's pregnancy. Understanding dawned cold and bitter. She lost the baby. We don't know for certain, but the timing is suggestive. Of course, Kael would suddenly want Lily now that his backup plan had failed, now that his perfect Luna couldn't give him the heir he'd rejected me for. Well, he can't have her. The words came out fierce, protective. Lily is mine. I won't let him use her as a replacement for what he lost. Legally, he may have grounds, one of the advisors began. Legally, he rejected Mara in front of witnesses. Thorne interrupted, his voice carrying alpha command. That rejection severed all bonds, all claims. The law Kael cites applies to recognized mates, not rejected ones. He could argue the rejection only applied to Mara, not the child. Then he'd be arguing he kept rights to a child while abandoning the mother who carried her. Thorne's eyes blazed with barely suppressed anger. Let him try to make that case before the Council of Alphas. See how well that reflects on his honor. Silence fell over the chamber. I realized with a start that Thorne was preparing to fight for us. Not just out of obligation to his grandfather's oath, but because he believed it was right. What does the letter say? I asked quietly. I should know what we're dealing with. Thorne broke the seal and unfolded the parchment. His jaw tightened as he read. He requests your return within the month. Claims it's for Lily's benefit that she deserves to grow up in her father's pack with her birthright intact. His voice dripped with contempt. He offers reconciliation. Says he was hasty in the rejection and is willing to reconsider if you return promptly. Rage pure and bright flooded through me. Reconsider, as if he's doing me a favor, as if I should be grateful for the chance to be his backup Luna now that his first choice failed. There's more. Thorne's expression darkened further. He mentions that he heard you found refuge in the Northern Rockies. He suggests it would be unfortunate if our packs came into conflict over this matter, that he hopes it can be resolved peacefully. Is he threatening you? I couldn't believe the audacity. He's posturing, Olga said dismissively, trying to intimidate. Golden Ridge has neither the numbers nor the strategic position to threaten the Northern Rockies. But he could cause problems, another advisor noted. Stir up trouble with the other packs, claim we're harboring his mate and child against pack law. Mara is not his mate, Thorne said flatly. He rejected that bond, and she's chosen to join our pack of her own free will. No law compels her to return. He turned to me, and I saw something in those fierce amber depths that made my breath catch. A question, a request. But it has to be your choice, Mara. Truly your choice. I won't hold you here if you want to go back. If you think Lily would be better off, no. The word came out sharp. Absolute. I'm not going back. Kale made his decision when he rejected us in front of the entire pack. When he chose a woman who could give him sons over the mate bond we shared. He doesn't get to change his mind now that it's convenient. I stood planting my palms on the table, meeting the eyes of each advisor in turn. I'm staying here. Lily is staying here. This is our pack now, our home, and I'll fight anyone who tries to take that from us. Pride flickered across Thorne's face. Olga actually smiled, a rare expression on her stern features. Then it's decided, Thorne said. I'll send a formal response to Kyle, informing him that Mara Silverthorne is a member of the Northern Rockies pack under my protection and that she has chosen to remain here of her own free will. Any attempt to remove her or her daughter will be considered an act of aggression against this pack. That's essentially a declaration of intent to defend by force, one advisor cautioned. Yes, Thorne's voice carried absolute authority. It is. Let Keshel understand exactly where we stand. The meeting adjourned shortly after. The advisors filed out, already discussing defensive preparations and diplomatic strategies, just in case Kyle was foolish enough to escalate. But Thorne lingered, and I found myself alone with him in the council chamber. You're certain, he asked quietly, this may cause complications, political tensions. I don't want you to feel trapped. I moved before I could overthink it, crossed the space between us, and placed my hand on his arm. The first time I'd initiated physical contact. I've never been more certain of anything, I said, looking up into his eyes. Kale had his chance. He threw it away. I'm not going to waste my life waiting for a man who didn't value me to suddenly decide I'm good enough. Thorne covered my hand with his own. Large, warm, solid. For what it's worth, he said, his voice low and intimate, I think he's a fool to have had you and let you go, to have looked at your daughter and seen failure instead of blessing. Emotion swelled in my chest. You barely know me. I know enough. His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand. I know you're brave, strong, compassionate. I know you love your daughter with a fierceness that borders on frightening. A small smile. I know Rowan adores you. Elena sings your praises. Even Olga approves, which is saying something. And you? The question slipped out unbidden. What do you think? His free hand came up to cup my cheek. The gesture was becoming familiar, comforting. I think I'm grateful every day that storm brought you to my territory, that Rowan got lost and you found him. His gaze searched mine. I think I'm starting to care for you more than is probably wise given the complications we're facing. Wise or not, I whispered, I'm beginning to feel the same way. The kiss happened so naturally it felt inevitable. His lips brushed against mine, gentle at first, asking permission. When I didn't pull away, he deepened it slightly. Still careful, still respectful of my past hurts. It was nothing like kissing Kale had been. There was no demand here, no sense that I owed him this. Just two people choosing each other, finding comfort in connection. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt genuinely happy. We should probably take this slowly, Thorne said, though he didn't release me. Given everything you've been through, everything we're still dealing with. Slowly sounds good, I agreed. I need time to heal, to learn to trust again. We have time. He pressed his forehead to mine. All the time we need. But time, it turned out, was something we didn't have as much of as we'd hoped. 2 weeks after Kyle's letter arrived, the man himself appeared at our gates. The announcement of Alpha Kale Ironwood's arrival sent ripples of tension through the manor. I was in the nursery with Lily when Elena came to find me, her face grave. He's here, she said simply. 20 warriors with him. They're being received in the Great Hall. My hand stilled on Lily's blanket. She was awake playing with her toes, completely oblivious to the threat standing at our gates. 5 months old now, healthy and thriving. Her silvery hair had grown thicker, and she'd started babbling in that way babies did, creating sounds that weren't quite words, but were full of meaning nonetheless. Does Thorne know I'm here? He sent me to get you. Elena's expression was kind but firm. He wants you in the hall, not hidden away like you have something to be ashamed of. She was right, of course. Hiding would only make me look weak, like I feared Kale, like I regretted my choice. And I didn't, not for a moment. Will you keep Lily, I asked, gathering my daughter into my arms for one last embrace before facing my past. Of course. Elena took her gently. Lily went without fuss. She'd grown comfortable with the healer over the past weeks. She'll be safe with me, I promise you that. I kissed Lily's forehead, breathing in her sweet baby scent. Drew strength from the solid weight of her in my arms. This was who I was protecting. Why I had to be strong. Mama will be back soon, little love, I whispered. Then to Elena, if anything happens to me, nothing will happen to you, Mom, Elena interrupted firmly. You're under Thorne's protection. In his territory, Kale would have to be monumentally stupid to try anything here. But stupidity and desperation often walked hand in hand. I smoothed down my dress, a deep green wool that Elena had given me far finer than anything I'd owned even as Kael's mate, and made my way toward the Great Hall. My heart hammered against my ribs. My palms were slick with nervous sweat. But I kept my spine straight, my head high. I was not the broken Omega Kael had discarded. Not anymore. The Great Hall was packed. Word had spread quickly, and pack members lined the walls, curious to see this confrontation. Thorne sat in his chair at the head of the room, radiating authority. Olga stood at his right hand. Other advisors flanked him, and in the center of the hall stood Kael. I'd almost forgotten how handsome he was. Tall and broad-shouldered with golden brown hair and green eyes that had once looked at me with warmth. He wore traveling clothes but carried himself with the confidence of an alpha in his prime. But I could see the cracks now, the tightness around his mouth, the shadows under his eyes, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. This was not a man at peace with himself. His warriors stood behind him, 20 strong, as Elena had said. A show of force meant to intimidate. But they were outnumbered 5-1 here, and everyone knew it. Kael's eyes found me the moment I entered. Something flickered in them, surprised perhaps at how I'd changed. I was no longer gaunt from starvation. My hair shone with health, my dress was fine, and I walked with my head held high, not cowering. Mara, he said my name like a prayer, or perhaps a curse. You look well. I didn't respond, simply moved to stand beside Thorne's chair. Not behind it like a subordinate, but beside it. A position that spoke of partnership, of respect. Thorne's hand briefly touched mine, a gesture of support that Kael's sharp eyes didn't miss. Alpha Ironwood. Thorne said, his voice cool and formal. You've traveled far. State your business. Kael tore his gaze from me to address Thorne. I've come for what's mine, my mate and my daughter. They were taken from my territory. I wasn't taken, I interrupted, my voice ringing clear through the hall. I left after you rejected me in front of the entire pack and cast me out. Murmurs rippled through the assembled wolves. Kael's jaw tightened. That was a mistake, he said, and for a moment he almost sounded sincere. Made in haste, under pressure from my advisors and the pack elders. I've regretted it every day since. Have you? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Is that why you waited 6 months to say so? Why you only came looking once your new Luna lost her pregnancy? The murmurs grew louder. Kael's face flushed with anger or shame, I couldn't tell which. Vivian was a political match, he said tightly. Nothing more. She could never replace what we had. What we had, I interrupted again, was a bond you severed, a connection you destroyed. You don't get to reclaim it now that it's convenient. The child is mine, Kael insisted, shifting tactics. Lily, she carries my blood. Pack law says a rejected mate has no claims. Thorne cut in his voice, carrying Alpha command. You severed all bonds, all rights. You made that choice in front of witnesses. The law refers to mates, not offspring. So you're arguing you maintained rights to a child while abandoning the woman who carried her. Thorne's eyes blazed with barely suppressed fury. While casting out a pregnant Omega to survive alone in the wilderness, Tell me, Alpha Ironwood, how does that reflect on your honor? Silence fell. Kale's warriors shifted uncomfortably. Even they could see how badly this looked. I made mistakes, Kale admitted, and now he was looking at me again, pleading. I know that. I'm asking for a chance to correct them. Come back to Golden Ridge, Mara. Bring Lily. I'll make this right. No. The word echoed through the hall. Simple. Absolute. Kale blinked as if I'd struck him. Mara, please. Think about what's best for Lily. She deserves to grow up knowing her father. To have her birthright. She has a birthright, I said firmly. Here, in the Northern Rockies pack, where she's valued for who she is, not what gender she happened to be born. Where she'll grow up seeing Omegas respected for their skills and contributions, not just their ability to produce male heirs. I took a step forward, meeting Kale's eyes directly. You looked at her at the ultrasound showing she was a girl and called her insufficient. You rejected your own daughter before she was even born because she didn't meet your requirements. And now you want me to believe you've had a change of heart. I was wrong, Kale said, and there were actually tears in his eyes now. I know I was wrong. The pack elders, they demanded a male heir, said it was tradition. I felt trapped. And you chose to protect yourself instead of us. My voice softened slightly because I could see his pain was real, even if it changed nothing. I understand the pressure, Kyle, I do. But understanding doesn't mean forgiveness. And it doesn't mean I'm coming back. What about Lily's rights? He tried again, desperate now. She's the daughter of an alpha. She has everything she needs, Thorne said quietly. A mother who loves her, a pack that values her, protection and a future. What more could you offer? Kale's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought he might do something foolish. Challenge Thorne, demand trial by combat. Instead, he seemed to collapse inward, the fight draining out of him. I loved you, he said to me, his voice breaking. I still do. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking anyway. Please don't let my mistakes destroy what we had. And looking at him, I felt pity and a distant sadness for what might have been if he'd been braver, if he'd chosen differently. But I felt no desire to go back. What we had, I said gently, was destroyed the moment you chose pack politics over our bond. The moment you looked at our daughter and saw failure instead of blessing. I can't rebuild that, Kyle. I don't want to. So that's it. Bitterness crept back into his voice. You've already moved on, found a new alpha to take care of you. The implication stung, that I was simply trading one protector for another, that I had no agency in my own choices. I've found a pack that respects me, I corrected coldly, where my skills are valued, where I can contribute rather than just exist as decoration for an alpha's arm. If you can't understand the difference, that says everything about why this would never work. Thorne stood, then drawing every eye in the hall. The sheer presence of him filled the space. Alpha Ironwood, you've had your answer. Mara Silverthorne is a member of the Northern Rockies pack by her own choice. She's under my protection and that of our ancestors' oath. I suggest you accept this and leave peacefully. It was dismissal, clear and final. Kale looked between us, his expressions cycling through anger, grief, desperation, finally settling on resignation. If I can't change your mind, he said to me, then I have one request. Let me see her. Just once, let me see my daughter before I go. The request caught me off guard. It seemed genuine, and perhaps despite everything, Lily deserved to know her father existed, to have that choice available when she was old enough to make it. I looked at Thorne. He gave a slight nod, leaving the decision to me. One visit, I agreed carefully. Supervised in the nursery, 10 minutes. Kale nodded, relief washing over his features. Thank you, that's all I ask. 20 minutes later, I stood in the nursery with Kale while Elena and Olga watched from the doorway. Thorne had offered to come as well, but I declined. This moment, however painful, was private. Lily was awake, lying on a soft blanket and waving her arms at the dancing shadows the fire cast on the ceiling. She'd gotten bigger, stronger. Her eyes were bright and alert, taking in everything around her with intense curiosity. Kale stood frozen in the doorway, staring at her like she was a vision he couldn't quite believe. She's beautiful, he whispered. Yes, I agreed simply. Slowly, carefully, he approached, knelt beside the blanket. Lily's eyes tracked his movement, and when he reached out a tentative hand, she grabbed his finger with surprising strength. Something in Kyle's expression crumbled. Tears spilled down his cheeks, unchecked. I'm sorry, he said, though I wasn't sure if he was talking to me or to her. I'm so sorry. You deserve better than me, better than what I gave you. Lily gurgled happily, completely unaware of the emotional weight of this moment. She was just a baby meeting a stranger, finding his tears fascinating. She doesn't know me, Kale said, his voice thick. She's my daughter and she doesn't even know me. That was your choice, I reminded him not unkindly. I know. He looked up at me then, and the raw pain in his eyes was almost unbearable to witness. I know it was, and I have to live with that. But Mara, please, even if you never want to see me again, don't keep her from me entirely. Let me know she's all right. Let me, let me be part of her life somehow, even at a distance. The request surprised me, not a demand for custody or rights, but a simple plea to not be cut off completely. I thought about my own father who died when I was young, how I treasured every story my grandmother told about him, every small connection to the man who'd helped create me. I won't keep her from you, I said finally. When she's older, when she can understand, I'll tell her about you. And if she wants to know you, to have a relationship with you, I won't stand in the way. Relief flooded his features. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. It's not about what you deserve, I said quietly. It's about what's best for Lily. And having a father who wants to know her, even if he made terrible mistakes, might be better than having one who's completely absent. Kale spent the remaining minutes simply watching Lily play, memorizing her features. When his time was up, he stood reluctantly. Be happy, he said to me. I mean that. Whether it's with the Northern Alpha or not, be happy. You deserve that much. I intend to be, I answered. And Kale, I hope you find happiness too. Real happiness, not just what the pack elders think you should want. He nodded, then turned and left before his emotions could overwhelm him completely. I sank down beside Lily's blanket, feeling drained, emotionally wrung out, but also lighter. That confrontation had been building for weeks, and now it was done. Lily reached for me and I gathered her into my arms. She was solid and warm and real. My daughter, my future, and she was safe. The next morning, Kael and his warriors departed. I watched from a high window as they rode away, becoming smaller and smaller until they disappeared into the forest. Thorne found me there, standing alone in the quiet. How are you feeling? He asked, coming to stand beside me. Relieved, I admitted. Sarmaya, grateful, all of it at once. That's understandable. He was quiet for a moment. You were generous letting him see her. He's still her father. That means something, even if it doesn't mean everything. I turned to look at Thorne. Does it bother you that she's another Alpha's child? No, Ergo. The answer was immediate and certain. She's yours, that's what matters. And she's precious to Rowan, which makes her precious to me. Speaking of Rowan, the boy himself came barreling down the corridor, skidding to a stop when he saw us. Mara, Papa, guess what? I can almost do the full shift now. Elder Marcus says I'm the fastest learner he's seen in years. Pride bloomed in my chest. That's wonderful, sweet one. Will you come watch me practice? He looked between us hopefully. Both of you. Thorne and I exchanged glances. These moments had become more common over the past weeks. The three of us, sometimes four, with Lily, spending time together like a family. It felt natural, right? Of course, Thorne said. Lead the way. We followed Rowan to the training grounds where several young wolves were practicing their transformations under the watchful eye of the elders. Rowan ran ahead, eager to show off his progress. He's thriving, I observed, watching him laugh with the other children. He is. Thorne's hand found mine, fingers intertwining naturally. You've been good for him, Mara, for all of us. I leaned into his warmth, letting myself enjoy this moment of peace, of belonging. I need to tell you something, Thorne said after a moment, his voice serious. My stomach clenched. What is it? The pack elders have been talking about us, about what we're becoming. He turned to face me fully. They've suggested that I consider taking a mate, that Rowan needs a mother figure officially, not just someone who cares for him. My heart started racing. And what did you tell them? I told them I wouldn't rush into anything, that I'd only mate with someone I genuinely cared for. Someone who would be a true partner, not just a political convenience. His gaze held mine. Someone brave enough to build a life from nothing, strong enough to face down her past, compassionate enough to show mercy to those who hurt her. Thorne, I'm not asking for an answer now, he interrupted gently. We agreed to take things as slowly, and I mean that. But I want you to know my intentions, Mara. I want you to understand that this isn't casual for me, that when I look at you, I see my future. If you'll have it. Tears pricked at my eyes, good tears this time, healing tears. I see it too, I whispered. I'm not ready yet. I need more time to heal, to be certain, but I see it. He pulled me close and I rested my head against his chest, felt his heartbeat steady and strong beneath my ear. "Then we have time," he murmured into my hair. "All the time we need." On the training grounds, Rowan successfully completed his shift, transforming from boy to wolf and back again with barely a shimmer. His delighted laughter carried on the wind, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt genuinely hopeful about the future. 3 months passed in peaceful routine. Winter deepened its grip on the territory, but inside the manor we were warm and safe. I continued working in the medical wing, earning the respect of even the most skeptical pack members. My evening storytelling sessions grew so popular, we had to move them to the Great Hall to accommodate everyone. Lily grew stronger every day. She'd started sitting up on her own, grabbing at everything within reach. Rowan doted on her like a proud older brother, and it was becoming harder to remember a time when they weren't part of each other's lives. And Thorne courted me with a patience and care that healed wounds I hadn't realized still bled. He brought me books on herbs from distant territories, commissioned craftsmen to make special tools for the medical wing, sought my opinion on pack matters, and actually listened when I spoke. We shared meals together, walked in the winter garden, talked long into the night about everything and nothing, and slowly, carefully, we built something beautiful. It was Rowan who finally pushed us over the edge we'd been carefully avoiding. "When are you and Mara getting mated?" he asked his father one evening at dinner, with all the subtle tact of a 6-year-old child. I nearly choked on my water. Thorne raised an eyebrow. "That's a question for Mara and me to discuss privately," he said calmly. "But you love her, right?" Rowan persisted. "And she loves you, gamin." "Rowan, I see how you look at each other. Everyone does. Elder Marcus says it's about time the pack had a Luna again. And I want Mara to be my mama for real. Not just someone who takes care of me. Really real." Out of the mouths of children came the truth we'd been dancing around. I looked at Thorne across the table, found him already watching me, a question in his eyes. "He's not wrong," I said quietly, "about how I feel, about what I want." "Neither is he wrong about how I feel," Thorne answered. "The question is, are you ready, truly ready?" Was I? I'd been rejected, cast out, left to die in the wilderness. I'd survived the unsurvivable and built a new life from ashes. I'd healed, grown stronger, found my worth not in someone else's acceptance, but in my own skills and choices. And looking at Thorne, this man who'd given me safety and then given me space to become whole again, I knew the answer. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." Rowan let out a whoop of joy. Thorne's face transformed with a smile that made him look years younger. "Then I have a question to ask you," he said, standing and moving around the table to kneel beside my chair. "Mara Silverthorne, would you do me the honor of becoming my mate, my partner, my Luna?" "Yes," I breathed. "Yes to all of it." He pulled me into his arms, and when he kissed me, it felt like coming home, like finding the place I was always meant to be. Rowan danced around us, singing about having a mama. Lily, sitting in her chair, clapped her hands and babbled along, not understanding, but feeling the joy. And in that moment, surrounded by love and laughter and the promise of a future I'd almost lost hope of finding, I finally understood what my grandmother had meant. The moonstone hadn't led me to a place. It had led me to people, to family, to home. The mating ceremony was held under the full moon 2 weeks later. The entire pack gathered to witness as Thorne and I spoke our vows before the elders and the ancestors. "I promise to stand beside you as an equal," Thorne said, his voice carrying across the assembled wolves, "to value your wisdom, to protect what you love, to build a future together built on respect and partnership." "I promise to bring my strength to this pack," I answered, "to use my gifts in service of all, to love your son as my own, to face whatever comes with courage and faith." When Thorne bit down gently where my rejection mark had been, transforming it into a mating bond, I felt the connection snap into place, clean and whole and right. The pack howled their approval. Rowan stood in the front row beaming. Elena held Lily, who watched the proceedings with wide, curious eyes. And as Thorne pulled me into his arms for our first kiss as mates, I felt truly complete for the first time in my life. The rejected Omega had become Luna. The worthless daughter had become treasured. The broken wolf had healed. Spring arrived in full force, transforming the Northern Rockies territory into a tapestry of green and gold. The winter garden that Thorne's mother had created burst into bloom, filling the air with the scent of jasmine and honeysuckle. I stood in the courtyard, my hand resting on the swell of my pregnant belly, watching Lily toddle after Rowan through the flower beds. She was 13 months old now, walking steadily and beginning to form words. Her first had been Roro, her name for her protective older brother. You're thinking, Thorne observed, coming up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. His hands settled over mine on our growing child. Just reflecting, I said, on how much has changed. Do you have any regrets? I thought about it honestly, about the pain I'd endured, the fear, the desperate months of survival. No, I answered finally, because all of it led here, to you, to this family, to this life. His arms tightened around me. One of the changes that had rippled through the territory was the healing academy I had established. With Elena as co-director, we'd already graduated our first class of 15 Omega healers. Young wolves from across 5 neighboring packs had come to train, learning that their worth extended far beyond their ability to bear children. The impact had been measurable and profound. Mortality rates had dropped 40% across the participating packs. Omegas were being appointed to advisory positions. 3 new laws had passed through the Northern Alliance in the past 6 months, focused on protecting Omega rights and recognizing healing knowledge as valuable contribution to pack strength. 5 neighboring packs had adopted our model. 10 more were considering it. Letters arrived weekly from Omegas across the territories asking to train at our academy. The world was changing, and it had started here. I got a letter today, I said, from Kale. Thorne tensed slightly. Oh, he's made it again. A widow from a neighboring pack. They're expecting a son. I smiled. He sounds happy. Actually happy, not just performing happiness. I'm glad for him, Thorne said, and sounded like he meant it. Everyone deserves a chance at real happiness. He asked if he could visit Lily in a few months when things are settled, bring his new mate to meet her. What did you tell him? That we'd discuss it. That if he truly wants to be part of her life, not as an alpha claiming rights, but as a father-building relationship, we're open to it. Rowan's laughter rang out across the garden as Lily grabbed a butterfly, then giggled when it flew away. The sound was pure joy. You have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known, Thorne murmured. I just know what it's like to have pieces of your history missing, I said. If Lily can have a relationship with her father that's healthy and positive, I won't deny her that. We stood in comfortable silence watching our children play in the spring sunshine. The Northern Rockies pack moved through their daily routines around us. Peace settled over the territory like a warm blanket. I brushed my fingers over the silver crescent at my throat, still there, still connecting me to my grandmother's legacy. Thank you, I whispered to her spirit wherever it rested, for the gift, for the guidance, for believing I was worth saving. Thorne turned me in his arms, reading the emotion on my face. You saved yourself, he said firmly. The moonstone just showed you the way. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps my grandmother's greatest gift wasn't the pendant or the ancient oath, but the belief that I had value, that I was worth fighting for, that even rejected, cast out, and broken, I could rebuild. And looking at the life I'd created, the family I'd found, the respect I'd earned, the future I was building, I knew she'd been right. The Omega who'd been deemed insufficient had become essential. The woman they'd thrown away had become irreplaceable. And the child they'd rejected had become the catalyst for change across the territories. As the sun set over the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, I stood surrounded by love and breathed in the sweet air of freedom. This was home, truly home. And this time no one could take that away. Rowan ran up to us, Lily in his arms. Mama. Papa, Lily said a new word. Tell them, Lily. My daughter looked at me with those bright, intelligent eyes and said clearly, Mama. Tears spilled down my cheeks. Good tears. Healing tears. Thorne kissed the top of my head. Rowan beamed. And Lily clapped her hands, delighted by the reaction she'd caused. This was what my grandmother had seen. This was what the moonstone had promised. Not just survival, not just safety, but belonging, purpose, love, home.